Oh no! Come on, fuckwad. Buy a goddamn tripod. Well, I don't know what time it is. It doesn't matter. Time is a construct. Financial Times. A look at the long-term impact on TSMC's business as the U.S. seeks to reduce its dependency on Taiwanese chips and cut China off from key semiconductor supplies. Related, Financial Times, sources, Chinese memory chip maker YMTC asks core U.S. staff to leave the company after its CEO stepped down ahead of the latest U.S. export controls announcement. Related, or also related, Josh Horowitz, Reuters, Chinese government data shows chip imports fell 12.4% year over year to 47.6 billion units in September. In January to September, domestic chip production fell 10.8% year over year to 245 billion chips. Unclear. What's the Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times. I don't want to wade into this one any more than that today. Staying with peak energy. Mark Gurman, Bloomberg. Right? Mark Gurman, Bloomberg. Sources, 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro with M2 Pro and M2 Max and an M2 Mac Mini are coming soon. Apple tests a Mac Pro with 24 CPU cores, 72 GPU cores, and 192 gigabytes of RAM. I'm a sucker for a good Apple story. I suppose the interesting thing in the most general sense here, laptops get better, not particularly interesting. The Mac Pro defining the sort of maximum ceiling of what you can do with an Apple designed chipset. That's interesting if for no other reason than the AI generated media tool ecosystem has arrived in executables that you can run on desktop Macs that have Apple chips inside of them. So the notion that we're very close to Apple completing its transition of the Mac line to Apple Silicon chips, you could see significant application for a Mac Pro in AI generated media applications. That could be really cool. And that's, on a personal note, the fact that we're very, very close to iCloud shared photo libraries shipping and solving a personal issue for me, which is I have a household with multiple human beings. Those human beings all have access to iOS devices, and the photographs that are taken on those devices have no first party support for housing them as a single cohesive library. Therefore, I've had to concoct a whole Rube Goldberg machine of other tools, Lightroom, Backblaze, the NAS storage appliance, in order to house the family photo archive. And this is just for the 3 human beings in my house. This doesn't take into account the notion that my brother has his household's photo library, and on some material percentage of the photos that are being created in both of those houses ought to be available to our parents, so that, you know, the notion of a family and the documentation of a family can be available and accessible to everyone in the family. It's a good goal. And so a Mac Mini that's even more powerful pushes down the value of secondhand Mac Minis. And that's appealing to me because while I thought about, you know, shoehorning Mac OS onto the hand-built Windows box, Intel box that I have in the house, the reality is it may be easier to just turn the key and spend somewhere between $500 and $1,000 to have a thing that runs Mac OS that jacks into the same keyboard and display and pointing device that I use when I sit down at a desk. So I'm excited. It's good. The Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Interviews with TikTok moderators in Colombia, contracted via teleperformance, describe pay as low as $10 per day, horrific content, long hours, and more. I'm not sure there's a tremendous amount to say aside from, I had a friend at Microsoft who worked on OneDrive for a period of time, and these are the same problems that OneDrive has. The housing of user data, almost by definition, it would seem, means taking on the responsibility for the most sort of grotesque, horrific material that human beings are capable of producing and digitizing. It's terrible to contemplate, but it's the world we live in. And therefore, there's some responsibility to remove that content, if for no other reason than to limit your entity's legal liability. Though, let's be clear, there's arguably a moral obligation to do this. And so the notion that it's farmed out to third-party contract businesses, which have incentive structure, unit economics, both, that drive for the least amount of compensation and support to the human beings who have to go do the work, it sucks. It's awful. It would be better if we lived in a world where the ludicrously profitable businesses which offer to the market to house user data take seriously compensating and caring for the human beings who have to deal with the most negative of externalities of user data. Side note, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, hell of a name, worth looking into. I spent a minute looking at their about page. They've got some pretty meaningful transparency in terms of where they get their funding and how they spend their money. Bold claim to get out there with such a brand in 2022. I'll be curious to see how that entity evolves over time. Time for a set. Henry Wren, Bloomberg. As President Xi Jinping consolidates his grip on China's ruling party, Alibaba, JD.com, Naspers, and other tech stocks drop by 10%. I kind of want to return null here. I suppose the one thing that this makes me think of, I think it was a chart that Balaji Srinivasan tweeted out. I'm going to get the details of the axes, well, one of the axes of the chart wrong, I'm sure. But broadly speaking, the chart was showing over time the extraordinary growth of data about the Chinese economy being available, and that in the past few years, that curve is reversing course, and that less information about the Chinese economy is being published and shared. So, again, it's going to be hard to comment until, I don't know when, China's moving away from sort of, broadly speaking, transparent form of operating as a state, and China and the United States continue to turn their backs on one another. Doesn't seem like the smartest move. More or less, we got one planet to work with, but it's where we are. I'm not sure there's too much else to say, at least right now. Sunil Jagliani, Bloomberg. FTX plans to offer $6 million to account holders impacted by a phishing incident via a third-party site, but says this kind of relief will not become the norm. Today's edition of Blockchains Not Crypto. I'm trying to come up with a more succinct label to encapsulate my notion that while blockchains are a tremendous idea, which can, I believe, further a symbiotic relationship between human beings and machines, cryptocurrency, the upgrading of money to being software, not to say that that doesn't already happen and hasn't been happening for quite some time. Of course it has. It's going to keep having these sorts of problems because software is hard. And quite frankly, you could point to blockchains as a way to resolve quite a few of these things. It's drastically oversimplifying, but the notion that in order to participate in a NFT community, you have to have a wallet, and a wallet necessitates a seed phrase, which is, again, in my imperfect understanding, a fancy term for a master password, which is a series of words, most typically. And that's a significant upgrade from the pre-existing requirement that's placed upon the user to create an account in any Web 2 application space, which is just give us a string of characters, typically not more than 12, maybe 18, and meet a handful of requirements: a capital letter, a digit, a special character, and that's it. And we will scrub that data in some way, if we're responsible enough to do it, such that it can't easily be harvested if our systems are compromised. But the point is, the individual user's requirement in order to play is going to be significantly improved. And so maybe we get across the Rubicon and money moves over the internet in a truly sort of trustless fashion, and these sorts of phishing incidents will happen less often. But phishing, more or less by definition, is about social engineering. Go read about Kevin Mitnick. It has nothing to do with somebody hacking the Gibson. It has everything to do with someone tricking you into handing over your secrets. So this sort of stuff is going to keep happening. And the fact that FTX is offering a bailout, but also, again, sort of paternalistically wagging their finger and saying, don't think that bailouts will become the norm. You need to be responsible with your own money. We'll see. FTX doesn't exist without users. Users repeatedly feel that FTX isn't doing their job in protecting them, even from their own stupidity, respectfully, as users. Something tells me the FTX board is going to be willing to cut another check at some point in the future, but maybe not. Dan Seifert, The Verge. iPad 10th gen review. Great performance and battery, lots of apps and USB-C, but accessories are confusing and expensive. There's a high price and an average display. Gruber's got the write-up on this set of iPad announcements, the TLDR of which is, it would appear that Apple had to make these hardware announcements basically in order to get to the next more logical set of hardware announcements. There are a couple of interesting canaries. The fact that the entry-level iPad, not the anchor iPad, which stays in the lineup at $300 odd, but the entry-level iPad that they position as the one that ought to be purchased, the one that has shiny new accessories, the one that comes in bright colors, that USB-C moves to that device. And then on the Apple TV, which was also updated, the remote moves to USB-C. These would appear to be the early indicators that all of Apple's products will move to USB-C. I personally would be willing to bet as quickly as they are updated, which is to say, maybe the iPhone that ships in September of next year has a USB-C port on it, and we can close this chapter of proprietary connector interfaces. Yes, is there a whole morass of confusion around which cable and which charger and yada, yada, yada? Of course. But that's the future's problem. Today, there's a better iPad, which when you outfit it with the stylus that it supports and the keyboard that it supports, $800. It's not insignificant, but I think there's a way to look at the non-pro iPad space and see, again, Apple's vision for the future of computing, which is it's a modular device, not even the Pro, or the Pro's included here, the entire iPad category. If you zoom out and you stop worrying about which pencil is supported on this model in this moment in time and which keyboard works with which iPad, because as Gruber points out, that's particularly ridiculous when you look at the lineup today. I have this iPad, but it won't work with that keyboard. I don't get it. But broadly speaking, their vision is the computer is a magic slab of glass. It's what Alan Kay, famously said to Jobs after the announcement of the iPhone. If you can make this the size of an A4 sheet of paper, you'll rule the world. Rule the world may be a unfortunate choice of words, but whatever. But it's a modular thing. If all you need is a display, you can just hold the display in your hands. And it's extraordinarily comfortable to hold in your hands. If you need to do something free form, there is state-of-the-art stylus with which to do that, in addition to your fingers. You can use those two in conjunction, and it's a wonderful experience. You can position the paper, move the paper. If you need a keyboard, you can attach the device to a keyboard. Stage Manager, which is shipping today, which if you've been paying attention to the iPadOS 16 saga, is beyond comprehension for many people, the fact that it's shipping. Stage Manager says if you want to take this device and you want to have that same computing experience on a drastically larger display with a full-size keyboard and a pointing device, do it. Plug it into one cable. It's done. The thing will charge. Like when I was a kid, for a hot minute, my dad's home workstation was the PowerBook Duo 230. It was their small and light laptop of its day, and it had a dock. I mean, it looked like a toaster turned on its side that only had one slot. You took the whole laptop, you closed it up, you shoved it into this dock, and then it took advantage of the massive Trinitron monitor sitting on top of the dock and the keyboard and the mouse that were in front of the dock. Like, this is the dream. The thing weighs as much as a magazine and disappears into the average purse or briefcase, but it can scale all the way to a full-size stationary workstation. Can Mac portables do that? Yeah, more or less. But you can't rip the keyboard off of a laptop when all you want to do is sit and read something. So I continue to be bullish long term. That's why using an iPad to shout into the void like I'm doing right now. But we're certainly going through a awkward moment. Gillian Tan, Bloomberg, the Coterie, which lets founders access funds from Coterie, A16Z, and others to sidestep illiquid stock, raised a $40 million Series A led by A16Z at a more than $100 million valuation. It's noteworthy that Coterie is a synonym for Clique, which is to say club, which can have exclusionary characteristics. It would seem that the venture community's, one of the venture community's core beliefs at this moment in time is allow businesses to stay private as long as they can, or as long as they choose to. I think there's some value there. There are certainly businesses which have the potential to be materially impactful to society at large, but if left to the public market, may not be able to achieve those goals. And if the founders of those businesses aren't able to realize any of the value of their business until it gets into the public market, you're going to run into scenarios where people are going to leave. They're going to give up on the dream because you can't buy homes or private school tuitions or orthodontics or clothes with shares in a privately held business. So yeah, maybe there's a place for something in the market that will serve that need and allow people who have significant equity in a non-public entity to get access to more liquid funds. Is that ultimately a good thing or not? I think it's far too early for anybody to tell. Time for another set. Wall Street Journal. Sources. U.S. banks backing Elon Musk's Twitter deal plan to hold all $13 billion of debt on their balance sheets rather than selling it amid a difficult debt market. Good. That's your job. You're a bank. You do a deal. Yes. Do we live in a free market where you have every right to take an asset that you hold and sell it as you see fit? Sure. Is debt an asset? Yeah, I'll philosophically agree with that. Debt is not a guarantee, but the promise of money coming in. And so in a less difficult debt market, maybe it would make more sense for the banks which are helping Elon finance his Twitter purchase would sell Elon's debt to some other entity which has greater faith in his ability to pay it back, or is willing to take different terms. I don't know. I'm not a finance wonk. What's more interesting, but not really covered by this headline in the Elon Twitter saga, which I read about earlier this week, is the Washington Post report that Elon is considering cutting Twitter's headcount by as much as 75%. And I think the current Twitter headcount number is about 7,500 people. That, if this deal goes through, which all indications as of today are that it will, is nothing if not a big fucking statement. Naturally, many of the people at Twitter today would be upset by that. People don't want to lose their jobs. People shouldn't have to have the experience of losing their jobs. However, all that said, the idea that Twitter is better off continuing to be what it has been for, let's scope it and say, since 2016. I guess I don't know that I am willing to agree that the company is so well run that were it to change hands from an ownership perspective, and it's a little line item that gets overlooked when talking about Elon buying the company, because there are much scarier, louder things to consider, like allowing Kanye West to be anti-Semitic and maybe off his meds. Those are the big, bright, shiny notions related to Elon having more control over how the business operates. The line item that's important is he wants to make it a private business. He wants to take it out of what we were just talking about with the Coterie, which is every 90 days, it has to prove to the global public market that it's a good bet as a business. And if we look from 2016 to now, I don't know who at Twitter can make the case that they've been doing great and they will continue to do great, and that the future is bright for the business based on the last 6 years, 7 years of, God, I'm terrible at arithmetic. 2016 to 2020 is 4 years, now is 6 years of Twitter as a business operating. Again, my whole argument here, Twitter as a service, outstanding, great, arguably the final form of social media. Do we want to live in a society where the final form of social media is available to people who want to spew anti-Semitism into the public forum? No, I don't want to live in that world. Do we want to live in a world where unhinged people who reach high elected office can say whatever the hell they want? I don't necessarily want to live in that world either, but I'm not entirely convinced that any any business has the sort of legal standing to remove that means of expressing themselves from a US president or some other elected official. I'm not an attorney. I can't argue that. I'm a judge. I can't reasonably adjudicate it. Anyone who's willing to sit on the sidelines either is just a schmuck in their garage like me, or someone who's been working at Twitter for a decade who looks at you and says, no, we can absolutely come down on one side or the other. They don't know what they're talking about. It's not that simple. So if Elon buys the company and the company becomes private, and therefore voices which caused and to this day cause significant sort of psychic damage to all the other people on the planet, that's a difficult issue. I don't think it's cut and dried. But the notion that in taking Twitter private, a significant restructuring of the business will take place, and that an aspect of that restructuring is many people lose their jobs at Twitter. Again, I have all the empathy in the world. I don't want anyone to lose their jobs. But to the extent that you want a business like Twitter and the service which that business perpetuates to exist in the world and to thrive, those are the hard choices that need to get made. I don't know what more there is to say there. Bill Toulis, bleeping computer. Researchers find thousands of repos on GitHub offering fake proof of concept exploits for various vulnerabilities, with many of them containing malware instead. To the extent that I would describe myself as a hacker, which is not something I would do, I'm very much a white hat. The reason to spend one's time exploring vulnerabilities in, quite frankly, any human created system, whether it's software or silicon or law, in my view, ought to be in service of improving those things, of raising the floor of lived human experience. And so the idea that someone would go find an exploit for a vulnerability and take it off the shelf, and in so doing expose themselves to malware, I can't help but grin. There's no honor among black hats, I guess. And I may be oversimplifying. I am confident that there will or have been people who download code from one of these GitHub repos with white hat intentions and are instead compromised themselves. That's a bummer. However, it is kind of the water you choose to swim in, is computer system security, cybersecurity. And so if you're damaged by the malware, which comes along for the ride with the vulnerability exploit that you download from a GitHub repo, I think that's kind of on you. The more interesting thing, and maybe in a macro level, the more optimistic thing, is that GitHub continues to grow into this role as the global clearinghouse for software. That's a good thing. I think that's great. The notion that there is a sort of trusted clearinghouse repository where people who are attempting to educate themselves on how to build software can go and find any and all manner of prior art from other people. That's great. I think it continues to be a good thing for the world. Last set. Thomas Ricker, The Verge. IKEA Dirigera review. The Matter-ready smart home hub is easy to use and works well, but is expensive, lacks a migration tool from TradeFree, and is simplistic. The only smart home tools that I've purchased to date are actually from IKEA, because IKEA makes great endpoint solutions. If what you need is a bookshelf and you're not in a position to spend like heirloom money on a bookshelf, IKEA's got you covered. If what you need are dishes and you're not interested in buying dishes that you will hand down to your children, IKEA's got you covered. And so I thought at the time that if all I wanted were light bulbs that I could script to turn on and off from a machine, that IKEA would be a good choice. And they need some little hub. And so I got the hub. And it kind of worked. I'll give them even more credit. They did work. What they didn't solve was what I think I realize now I actually wanted, which was I need the lighting in my home to change based on the conditions provided by software. Hold on. Dog training waits for no one. So, as I was saying, the two light bulbs and the hub that I bought from IKEA, they didn't do the job I actually wanted done, which is I want all the lighting in my home to adjust based on the programming that I lay down. Two light bulbs were never going to do that. what's meaningful about matter is we appear right on the precipice to be entering an era where no matter whose light bulbs I buy, I can address them all using the same interface that is my preference, provided that there's a matter hub in the building. Apple's HomePod Minis, I believe, could be wrong, are matter hubs. The one of the two current Apple TVs that was announced this week is a matter hub. So either today or in the not too distant future, I'll have the required hub already because I'll have bought some of that Apple equipment. And what that enables is over time, as light bulbs die, I can replace them with bulbs which can be controlled using the Matter standard. And I can buy window shades which can be controlled using the Matter standard. And those two pieces will actually enable me to address the job I want done, which is when it's time to go to sleep, I want all the lights to go down. I want there to be a low light level in my house. When it's time to be awake, I want a high light level in my house. And there's greater nuance around the edges there, but you get the point. So the fact that the Matter standard is coming is a great thing. The fact that IKEA is building one doesn't seem like the right part of the stack for them. I don't know how expensive it is from reading The Verge's headline, but if you're approaching the same money as buying a smart speaker, then I think you're missing the plot. If I, as the user, am going to spend X amount of money, call it $200, call it $150, call it $100. If I'm going to spend $100 to enable all of the Matter compatible objects in my home to be addressed using my preferred interface, am I going to spend that $100 on a thing which only does that job? Or am I going to spend that $100 on a thing which does that job and some other meaningful utility, such as play music, such as be the interface to my film and television viewing? This is the issue. If IKEA wants to take their Sonos compatible speaker products and make those Matter objects, or make generic smart speakers and have those be Matter hubs, then maybe you've got something. I don't recall right now whether the 1.0 Matter spec supports smart speakers, but do you see the point? It's just not. IKEA is great at making the solutions at the very edge. I think that's where they add the most value for people. I'm not convinced that they should be making things that don't have some obvious demonstrable utility. Adam James, The Block. Research. Binance had a 55.1% share in spot crypto trading in the past 24 hours and 54.4% share of derivatives trading, easily surpassing FTX and others. So we got 2 episodes in today's edition of Blockchains Better Than Crypto. This one doesn't cost anybody any money, so it's not exactly the same. It's good to see that maybe, this is the most nascent of data points, maybe we're moving toward a place where there is consolidation in the purveyors of market making tools for people who want to trade crypto assets. But again, all of that exists under the umbrella of trading crypto assets. Are you sure? Holding things that exist on blockchains because they have utility to you, that's a different story. And for me personally, I could very easily see myself becoming a collector of photography, and to do that on a blockchain, to become a patron of people who make art, which is experienced via screens, and to do that in a way that allows for some chain of provenance. I think that's a totally reasonable thing to do. I have my personal artistic preference, which is selling me a JPEG of an image that has sort of a severe amount of synthetic quality to it. Personally, I don't want to own those things. If what you did is go to a place in the world and take a photograph and then, again, severely manipulate that photograph in order to create a final image which misrepresents what that part of the planet really looked like at that moment in time, I may not be as interested in supporting that work, because you're sort of idealizing real human experience as opposed to documenting real human experience. But we're right at the event horizon of the what is a photograph debate. We don't have time for that today. And so the reason I bring that up is to say that, let's say this year I purchase an NFT of a landscape photograph of a part of the planet that resonates with me as an individual. If a year from now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 16 years from now, that artist has grown to great success, then my having purchased their early work at a given rate may represent an opportunity for me to resell it. And this again is sort of the advantage of blockchains, programmatically prove that it was created by this person and is owned by me. So if it becomes owned by someone else, I benefit financially and the creator benefits financially. And yeah, there's an asterisk here that depending on how it's sold, depending on how the smart contract is structured, that sort of royalty strategy isn't baked in. But the notion that I might sell that in cryptocurrency A and then want to realize the lion's share of my gains in US dollars because I'm a normie, there should be a trusted clearinghouse for that transaction. And to the extent that Binance may be the leader in that space when the time comes, good for them. That's all I have to say.